Susan Sarandon, the woman who made Hollywood both admire and fear her. For more than half a century, she hasn't merely acted in films, she has lived as if every role were a battle to reclaim her own freedom. In a world where women must be gentle to be loved, she chose rebellion to be real. At the age when others retreat, she chose to love openly, laugh loudly, and speak about her fluid sexuality as a declaration of life itself. People remember Sarandon for her iconic roles. The death row mother in Dead Man Walking, the woman speeding toward freedom in Thelma Louise, but few understand that off-screen, she lived just the same way. Loving fiercely, breaking silently, then rising again to defy Hollywood with her honesty. From a Catholic girl taught to fear sin, she became a woman unafraid to reveal her fluid identity to the world. No marriage licenses, no conventions, no regrets. Susan Sarandon didn't just play the lead in her own life. She rewrote the script for women in a man's world. And to reach that freedom, what did she have to sacrifice? From the moment she let out her first cry on an autumn day in 1946 in Queens, New York, Susan Tomlin seemed destined for a life woven from contradictions. She was the firstborn daughter in a devout Catholic family of Irish and Italian descent, and the burden of being the eldest in a brood of 9 children soon fell upon her shoulders. That polarity was clearly evident within her parents themselves. Her father, Philip Leslie Tomlin, was an artistic soul, a former nightclub singer who carried within him both romantic dreams and a pragmatic edge. In stark contrast, her mother, Leonora Criscione, an Italian-American woman, was the embodiment of iron discipline and severity. But Leonora's hardness did not come from nowhere. It stemmed from an inherited trauma, a silent tragedy that had cast a shadow over the entire family line. Susan's maternal grandmother gave birth to her mother at only 14, then disappeared. It was not just a sad story. It was a legacy of emotional scarcity, a fear of abandonment that was silently passed down through generations, embedding itself deeply in the way Leonora shielded and controlled her children. Growing up in a conservative Catholic environment, Susan soon learned the lesson of sacrifice and endurance. Her childhood was a series of days shouldering the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings, a burden a child should not have had to bear. It was a paradoxical childhood. The house was always noisy, crowded with children's voices, yet Susan felt a bone-deep loneliness, a lack of understanding. She was forced into the mold of being well-behaved and obedient, while her young soul within screamed with longing to be free, to be herself. And then, amidst her desperate efforts to be a good child within that conservative Catholic shell, a horrific event tore her childhood apart. At the age of 12, Susan was sexually abused. It was not just an event. It was a toxic secret, a silent trauma that she buried in her soul for half a century, only daring to confront and disclose it when she was over 60. This shock, resonating with the harshness of the doctrine she already found suffocating, became the final hammer blow that shattered Susan's nascent faith forever. She didn't just lose faith in religion, she lost faith in the entire system of authority, especially the absolute authority of men and institutions that demanded blind obedience. This betrayal, by her attacker, and by the very silence of a system that should have protected her, planted the seed of a powerful resistance in Susan's soul. It was a fire that would later burn fiercely, shaping her uncompromising social activist persona. Her teenage years continued in Metuchen, New Jersey. After graduating from Edison High School, life pushed her into a great paradox. Despite having deeply lost her faith in the church, Susan still enrolled at the Catholic University of America. Perhaps it was the last remnant of the obedient path her family expected, or perhaps it was the only way for her to escape. But it was in the university environment that her desire for freedom truly exploded. To support herself and gain independence, Susan did not shy away from any job. She threw herself into life with extraordinary energy, waitressing, scrubbing hospital floors, working as a switchboard operator. She tasted real, raw life, a far cry from the dry moral lectures. More importantly, she began to make her own fateful choices. She flatly refused a prestigious ballet scholarship, a golden opportunity in the eyes of many. But to Susan, ballet was just another form of iron discipline, rigid rules that imprisoned the body and spirit. She chose the path of freedom, however rugged, instead of a predetermined future. And even as she was striving to build her independent life, the family foundation, which had seemed stable, albeit full of contradictions, finally cracked. It wasn't until 1982 that her parents officially separated. Although Susan was already an adult by this time and had gone through her own separation, this belated breakup was still another wound, cutting deep into her already fragile faith in marriage. It was like a bitter confirmation of the skepticism she had always carried about eternal commitments. This profoundly influenced how she defined love and her complex, unique relationships later on. Carrying the baggage of a heart full of scars, yet also burning with an unquenchable fire of rebellion, the young Susan Thomallen, now a drama student, ventured out into the world, searching for a stage where she could truly be herself. But ironically, destiny had arranged that her first major role would not be on a Broadway stage, but a real-life role, at a church no less. A marriage proposal from the man who would give her the surname the whole world would come to know. In 1970, fate found Susan Sarandon in the most unexpected way, and no one could have imagined it would become the turning point of her entire life. At the time, Susan and her first husband, Chris Sarandon, both auditioned for the film Joe. He was rejected, but she was chosen. A small opportunity, a seemingly ordinary outcome. Yet that very moment opened a journey that would span more than half a century in cinema. Joe wasn't a blockbuster, but for Susan, it was the first door leading her out of the confined, rule-bound life of her youth. The moment her dreams were finally allowed to breathe. Before that, her first project, The Next Oasis, had been canceled mid-production, a bitter failure, but also her first real lesson. In the world of art, nothing is guaranteed, and only those who endure survive. After Joe, Sarandon slowly found herself entering a new orbit. She took on small roles in both film and television, fleeting characters, supporting faces, but each role was a test of endurance in the ruthless machinery of Hollywood. Few realized that behind those small appearances, an icon of strength and freedom was quietly taking shape. Her first major breakthrough came in 1975, when she was cast as Janet Weiss in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a daring choice for an actress still struggling to find her footing in Hollywood. Sarandon couldn't sing and had never acted in a musical, but she accepted the part anyway, driven by curiosity about a script so bizarre that even the cast thought it would fail. Filmed in the damp, freezing English winter, she actually contracted pneumonia during shooting. Yet she kept performing, shivering and singing in thin costumes amid clouds of cold breath. No one could have predicted that the Rocky Horror Picture Show, with its rebellious soundtrack and songs like Time Warp, would become a cultural phenomenon. Sarandon's Janet Weiss, once timid and naive, evolved into a symbol of awakening and the desire for freedom, mirroring the transformation of Sarandon herself. The film flopped on release, but during its rescreenings, it became a cornerstone of LGBTQ+ culture, celebrating difference and shattering boundaries of gender, identity, and desire. And at the center of that revolution stood a woman who dared to say yes when the world called it madness. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Sarandon continued to prove she wasn't there to decorate the frame. Atlantic City, 1980, elevated her to true stardom. Acting opposite the legendary Burt Lancaster, she created a dialogue between two generations, both tender and razor-sharp. The role earned her first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, marking a new era in her career. No longer the promising newcomer, but an artist who knew exactly what she wanted to say. Off-screen, Sarandon's personal life was as bold as the roles she chose. She had a relationship with director Louis Malle, who taught her to see cinema as a language rather than just a profession, and later with David Bowie, another wild soul who lived by instinct. Both romances, brief yet intense, reflected the same truth. Sarandon never feared crossing boundaries, in art or in love. But what she didn't yet know was that after the bright lights of Atlantic City, another door was about to open, not to celebrate her, but to test her. And this time, Hollywood wouldn't just demand talent. It would see if Susan Sarandon had the strength to survive both glory and solitude. The true turning point came in 1991 when Susan Sarandon transformed into Louise in Thelma Louise, a film that became one of the biggest cinematic explosions of the 1990s. Two women, two seemingly fragile souls, choosing to drive off a cliff to protect their own freedom. A tragic ending, yet one that illuminated an entire generation. In every sun-drenched desert frame, as The Ballad of Lucy Jordan played like a farewell, Sarandon's gaze, calm, defiant, luminous, turned Louise into an eternal symbol of female liberation. From that moment, she was no longer just an actress, but the face of awakening, the embodiment of women who dared to say, enough. A year later, she stunned audiences once again in Lorenzo's Oil, 1992, playing a mother fighting to save her child from a terminal illness. No longer rebellion, but desperate love. The kind of strength that convinces you a mother's heart can challenge fate itself. Sarandon's performance didn't roar through words, but through her eyes. The eyes of a woman who refused to surrender. Then came Dead Man Walking, 1995, which lifted her to absolute greatness. As Sister Helen Prejean, Sarandon embodied not only compassion, but the profound conflict between justice and mercy. The film earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress and worldwide acclaim, not for fame's sake, but for the spiritual power she radiated. Behind the scenes, she personally met with real death row inmates, listened to their stories, and that raw empathy turned her performance into one of the most humane portrayals ever captured on film. Yet when the Oscar lights flared brightest, an inner emptiness quietly began to creep in. Because while the world celebrated Hollywood's strongest woman, Susan faced something no trophy could heal. A love that was beginning to crack, just when she thought she had found peace. After the dazzling glow of the Oscars, Sarandon did not slow down. She moved forward, each role like a new heartbeat, filled with challenge and humanity. Stepmom, 1998, brought her back as a dying stepmother, gentle, resolute, and brave. No longer the rebel, she became the embodiment of acceptance, transforming fear into grace. To the rhythm of Ain't No Mountain High Enough, she didn't just portray death, she portrayed serenity, the quiet wisdom of someone who had finally learned to let go without losing love. From the hunger to the client, Every Sarandon role became a fragment of the complex mosaic of human nature. Whether as a vampire's lover or a lawyer fighting an entire system, she inspired both admiration and tenderness. Because in every character there was a piece of herself, strong, untamed, yet deeply compassionate. Her relentless dedication brought her a multitude of honors, from BAFTA to SAG, along with numerous Golden Globe nominations. Hollywood called her the actress of intellect and heart, and few could dispute it. But the experience that shaped her most deeply came from a film that changed not only her career, but her life. On the set of Bull Durham, 1988, amid baseball scenes and bursts of laughter, Sarandon met Tim Robbins, a man 12 years her junior. No one suspected that this meeting would spark a love story spanning more than 2 decades. Passionate, luminous, and heartbreaking. Because this time, Hollywood wasn't just filming a romance, it was quietly witnessing the beginning of the most complicated love story of Susan Sarandon's life. After Bull Durham, Sarandon's career entered its mature phase, when each performance became an artistic declaration. She emerged as one of the defining faces of early 1990s cinema, delivering 3 of her greatest roles in succession: Thelma and Louise, 1991, Lorenzo's Oil, 1992, and The Client, 1994. Each represented a different facet of her being: the woman who chose freedom over submission, the mother who fought between life and death, and the lone attorney battling an unjust system. These 3 roles earned her a string of Oscar, BAFTA, and Golden Globe nominations, cementing her as the woman Hollywood could not define. No longer just a beautiful face, she became a humanist voice, an actress of both intellect and heart. And then Dead Man Walking, 1995, took it all to the summit. As Sister Helen Prejean, Sarandon crossed the line between faith and justice, turning every prayer into a question about humanity itself. Audiences sat in silence as the credits rolled, not just shaken by the cruelty of capital punishment, but by the light of forgiveness in Sarandon's eyes. That role won her the Oscar for Best Actress, but more importantly, it proved that Susan Sarandon wasn't merely acting. She was living each role as though it were her only way to understand the world. And yet, when everything seemed perfect, fame, love, respect, her life took an unexpected turn. Because sometimes the summit isn't where we are celebrated, but where we begin to lose what matters most. Crossing into the 2000s, Susan Sarandon never left the screen, but gradually shifted from silver screen star to storyteller of depth and reflection. She continued to take on diverse roles, from the quietly suffering mother in Igby Goes Down, 2002, to the conflicted yet empowered woman in Elizabethtown, 2005. Though smaller in scale than her 1990s masterpieces, these roles revealed a Sarandon who chose purpose over presence. Alongside film, she expanded into television, documentaries, and activism, speaking out for human rights, joining anti-hunger campaigns, and advocating for environmental causes. It was the moment she transcended the title of actress and became a voice. Even today, Susan Sarandon remains present on screen. Less frequently, more selectively. Each appearance a statement, each role a reflection. From the glitter of stardom, she has evolved into an artist of conscience and depth, for whom fame is no longer the destination, but the instrument to express something far greater. After years of pouring her entire energy into art, Susan Sarandon was no longer just an actress. She had become a symbol of freedom and female strength. Yet, behind the spotlight, her private life was a long journey of self-discovery, beginning with her first marriage, a chapter she would later describe as the right person at the wrong time, for the wrong reasons. Susan met Chris Sarandon in the mid-1960s, when both were students at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. At the time, she was an introspective young woman feeling out of place within the school's rigid Catholic environment, while Chris was a calm, intelligent theater student with a quiet charisma. The connection between two artistic souls quickly deepened, a relationship born more from emotional kinship than from impulsive passion. They fell in love discreetly, under the scrutiny of a conservative era when student relationships were closely monitored. When rumors spread that Susan might be pregnant, a false alarm that led the school to threaten expulsion unless they married, the couple decided to wed in 1967. It wasn't a romantic wedding, but a decision made under pressure. Susan would later admit she had no idea what she was doing, but the need for safety and fear of social punishment pushed them into marriage. The early years were modest and difficult. Chris pursued acting while Susan juggled odd jobs to survive and nurture her artistic dreams. Both believed cinema would be their escape from the confines of the world they felt trapped in. When Joe, 1970, came along, Susan was cast in the lead role while Chris was rejected, and the distance between them began to grow. It wasn't jealousy, it was simply that Susan was beginning to discover who she truly was. Their marriage lacked passion and was filled with silence. Chris loved quietly and steadily, while Susan, now awakening to the idea of personal freedom, longed to live as herself, not merely as someone's wife. They never had children, perhaps because both sensed they didn't have the strength to nurture something they no longer believed in together. By the late 1970s, their marriage had become little more than a polite facade. They separated quietly and finalized their divorce in 1979, after 12 years, together. Susan walked away with nothing but a hard-earned understanding that love cannot survive when born of fear. Chris, the gentle and kind man he was, continued to hold respect and goodwill toward her for years afterward. Leaving that marriage didn't break Susan. It liberated her. She emerged from it like shedding a skin, stepping into a new chapter of her life, one defined by passion, risk, and a refusal to conform. And soon, another door opened. Not toward safety, but toward the storm of love affairs that would make Hollywood watch in fascination. After her divorce from Chris Sarandon, Susan Sarandon didn't rush into another relationship. She spent several years working relentlessly, pouring all her energy into film sets, as if the sound of the camera could fill the silence left by a broken marriage. But it was on one of those sets that fate quietly found her again. In the mid-1980s, while filming Tempest, 1982, Susan met Franco Amuri, a young Italian director whose confidence, humor, and easy charm were unlike any man she had known before. He saw in her not just a rising star, but a woman both fragile and fierce, yearning to be loved without being controlled. To Susan, Franco was like a gust of European wind, unexpected, liberating, and exhilarating. They fell in love quickly, passionately, and without feeling the need to define what they were. Their relationship blossomed at a time when Susan was at the peak of her career, while Franco was still carving out his name. The differences in age and culture inevitably caused friction. She was an American woman, shaped by pain and experience. He was a dreamer, still full of youthful optimism. Yet despite everything, they shared one essential thing, a pure, uncalculated passion. And then, fate intervened once more. In 1985, Susan became pregnant. The news shocked Hollywood, as she was already 38 and had previously been diagnosed with endometriosis, a condition that doctors had told her would make it nearly impossible to conceive. The pregnancy became a defining moment in her life. Susan chose to keep the baby, despite advice to prioritize her career. In March 1985, she gave birth to her daughter, Eva Amuri, who would later follow in her mother's footsteps as an actress. For Susan, Eva was more than a child. She was a miracle, living proof that sometimes love and the human spirit are stronger than any medical verdict. But life afterward wasn't as idyllic as it seemed. Susan's career continued to soar, while Franco began to feel increasingly out of place under the shadow of the woman he loved. They lived in two separate worlds. She, constantly traveling across the U.S. for film projects. He, spending most of his time in Europe. The distance slowly became too wide to bridge, and love gave way to quiet resignation. In 1988, they parted amicably, preserving friendship and shared responsibility for their daughter. Franco returned to Italy to continue his work as a filmmaker, while Susan went back to Hollywood with little Eva, juggling the roles of single mother and working actress. To her, that relationship was like a short, gentle rain. Brief, but powerful enough to change the landscape of her life. It reminded her that she could still love, still give birth, and still live fully, even if it meant paying the price of solitude later on. And it was during those years of raising her daughter alone, still nursing the ache of separation, that Susan met another man, one who would stay with her for more than 20 years, and whose love would become one of Hollywood's most radiant yet heartbreaking stories. After her breakup with Franco Amuri, Susan Sarandon no longer believed in the idea of forever. She had experienced marriage, loss, and the sobering realization that love is sometimes just a moment, beautiful but fragile. Yet in 1988, when she accepted a role in Bull Durham, fate turned once more. On that baseball diamond in the southern heat and dust, Susan met Tim Robbins, a man 12 years her junior, awkward yet brilliant, unpredictable yet magnetic. At the time, Tim was a passionate newcomer, a bit reckless, while Susan was a seasoned star. Their connection began as an artistic curiosity, two actors discussing characters, cinema, and the idea of freedom in creativity. But soon, it deepened into something far more intimate. On screen, Annie and Crash were two souls colliding. Off screen, Susan and Tim were the same, drawn together in confusion, desire, and the belief that they could build a world of their own, one without roles or restraints. Their relationship lasted over 2 decades, one of Hollywood's most enduring and admired love stories. They never married. Susan, scarred by the pressure of her first marriage, believed that love only has meaning when it's chosen freely, day by day, not bound by paper or ceremony. Tim accepted and respected that fully. They lived as partners, shared ideals, and raised 3 children together. Susan's daughter, Ava, with Franco Amuri, and their 2 sons, Jack Henry, born 1989, and Miles Guthrie, born 1992. Their home was a rare blend of art and normalcy, lively, messy, yet deeply grounded. During those years, Susan reached the peak of her career with Thelma and Louise, Lorenzo's Oil, The Client, and Dead Man Walking. Tim rose alongside her, directing and starring in acclaimed works like The Shawshank Redemption and Mystic River. They attended the Oscars together, spoke out for human rights, and signed petitions against war. Hollywood dubbed them the intellectual couple of American cinema. Brilliant, idealistic, and elusive. But as the spotlight dimmed, the cracks began to show. Susan became increasingly introspective, while Tim buried himself in directing and political activism. Jealousy, as she later admitted, began to creep in, not from infidelity, but from Tim's quiet resentment at being overshadowed by her success and the affection the public had for her. When their 2 sons were born, joy came hand in hand with tension. Tim, who had grown up without much maternal affection, struggled with sharing Susan's love and attention with the children. Susan, long accustomed to endurance, began to realize she was losing the very freedom she had once fought for so fiercely. In 2009, after 23 years together, they announced their separation. No scandal, no blame. Just two people who had walked side by side for years and finally found themselves facing different directions. Susan didn't cry on television or issue statements to the press. She simply said, "There are moments when you have to be honest with yourself, even if it means breaking apart." After the split, they remained in contact, occasionally seen together at family gatherings or having lunch with their son in Venice, California. What remained between them was no longer love, but a profound mutual respect, something rare in Hollywood. And just when everyone thought Susan would retreat from romance, she surprised the world once again. In her 60s, the woman who once said, "Freedom matters more than marriage," began a new relationship with a man 31 years her junior. A love story that shocked Hollywood, but for Susan Sarandon, it was simply the next chapter in a life that only she could dare to write. After her breakup with Tim Robbins, Susan Sarandon entered her 63rd year, an age when most Hollywood women choose to retreat quietly or slip out of the spotlight. But she was different. She didn't drown in solitude or try to reinvent her image. She chose simply to keep living with the same freedom and instinct that had carried her through every heartbreak before. And in that seemingly calm period, she met Jonathan Bricklin, the man who would once again astonish the world. They met in 2010, just a year after Susan and Tim ended their 23-year relationship. Jonathan was an entrepreneur, screenwriter, and co-founder of the Spin Ping Pong Club, a mix of bar, music lounge, and social hub that Susan often visited with friends. He was 31 years younger, vibrant, witty, and radiated a kind of boyish vitality that made her, a woman who had long carried the weight of fame, responsibility, and age, feel light again. At first, they were business partners, working together to promote Spin, but late-night conversations about philosophy, creativity, and the belief that the world is far too serious not to play a little gradually turned into something deeper. To Jonathan, Susan wasn't a legendary actress, but a woman who could laugh, listen, and wasn't afraid to begin again. To her, he was proof that love didn't need age, only energy, something they shared as naturally as breath. Their relationship became a media spectacle. Many mocked them. Tabloids dubbed Susan the grandmother of unconventional love. But she didn't care. She once said that after every relationship, the only question worth asking is, did you truly live your feelings? And with Jonathan, the answer was yes. They were together for 6 years, traveling, attending events, and even co-producing the reality series My Crazy Love. But as the lights and schedules grew heavier, things began to shift. Jonathan wanted to expand his career. Susan, now in her late 60s, wanted to slow down. Conversations turned to silences. When the TV project Connected captured too many private moments, their relationship began to unravel. In 2015, they quietly parted ways. No bitterness, no statement, just two people who had run their course. Jonathan later called it a journey of learning, and Susan simply smiled, because in love, she had never once regretted. Since then, Susan Sarandon has lived alone, but never lonely. She spends her time with her children and grandchildren, in activism, and with herself. No longer defined by the titles of wife or lover, she remains a woman who dared to love, to leave, and to live truthfully. even when it shocked the world. And perhaps in that quiet authenticity, people finally understood why, after more than half a century in cinema, Susan Sarandon endures as a symbol of freedom. Not only on screen, but in the way she chooses to love and exist. In 2015, she once again forced the public to rethink love when she declared, "I don't care about gender, age, or color. I care about connection." From that moment, she became an icon of sexual and emotional freedom in Hollywood, a place where few dare to speak, live, or love on their own terms. She admitted she preferred dating younger partners because they're curious, open-minded, and unafraid to ask questions. For Sarandon, love isn't something to categorize. It's an energy to be exchanged. Perhaps it's that energy that keeps her ageless, a woman who seems to live entirely to her own rhythm, answerable to no standard, but her own. Throughout her career, she has often been the center of rumor and misinterpretation. Her spontaneous kiss with Gina Davis in Thelma Louise made tabloids label her bisexual. After The Witches of Eastwick, her fascination with incense and moon energy earned her the nickname Hollywood's Witch. In 2001, the New York Post accused her of throwing a hedonistic party, and she was so furious she cut ties with the paper permanently. But beyond her boldness in love, Sarandon has also been fearless in dissent. She once used the Freedom of Information Act to find out whether the FBI had monitored her, and she was arrested during a protest against the 2001 police shooting of Amadou Diallo. For her, activism isn't a duty. It's the natural continuation of that rebellious instinct she's carried since childhood. Her private life, too, is filled with moments of raw humanity, bittersweet and beautiful. Her son once cried after seeing her love scene in Bull Durham, a reminder that behind the rebel icon still beats the heart of a mother. In 2017, Susan Sarandon appeared on the cover of Harper's Bazaar in a blazing red corset, her gaze daring the world to look away. The media called her Hollywood's rebel grandma. When asked how she remained sensual at that age, she simply replied, "Because I'm still alive." It was both a declaration and a reminder. For Susan Sarandon, living, loving, and rebelling are simply different expressions of the same truth: freedom. And by 2025, nearing 80, Susan Sarandon still hasn't stopped. While many of her contemporaries have chosen silence, she continues to step into the world, not on red carpets, but in places where people need a voice. In early 2025, she became one of more than 600 artists, activists, and intellectuals who signed an open letter urging the BBC to air the documentary Gaza, Medics Under Fire, which had been delayed for political reasons. For Susan, it wasn't merely an act of solidarity with Palestine, but a defense of something greater: the right to know, to see, and to understand, values she's upheld all her life. Just months later, in late August, she drew global attention again by joining a humanitarian aid flotilla departing from Barcelona to Gaza, alongside Greta Thunberg and dozens of other activists. Despite her age and the risk of being denied entry, Sarandon stood on deck, wearing a windbreaker and dark sunglasses, gazing across the Mediterranean. The image spread across social media, living proof that her spirit of defiance had never dimmed. No longer the sexy actress or the Hollywood rebel, Susan Sarandon in 2025 is a woman of action devoting the remainder of her life to justice and human dignity. And perhaps that is her greatest role, one no director could ever write, except life itself. After more than half a century, the name Susan Sarandon is no longer just tied to legendary films. It has become a cultural symbol, where art and conscience merge into one. She is not merely an actress, but the embodiment of a generation of women who dared to speak, to love, and to live beyond all conventions. Susan Sarandon's legacy stands on two parallel pillars, that of a great artist and a fearless citizen. On screen, she created performances of enduring weight. Janet Weiss in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, a symbol of freedom and self-discovery. Louise in Thelma Louise, the voice of rebellion for millions of silenced women. And Sister Helen Prejean in Dead Man Walking, where she became the moral compass of a generation, earning her the Academy Award for Best Actress. Beyond the screen, Sarandon has been a voice for justice, for the marginalized, and for truth, even when that truth made Hollywood uncomfortable. At an age when many seek peace and anonymity, Susan Sarandon still speaks up, still signs petitions, still marches, and still stands beside the young people she believes in. She understands that freedom is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. And that spirit is what makes her different, a star untouched by time, because her light doesn't come from the stage, but from a heart that refuses to dim. Looking back, people may debate her statements, her choices, or her loves, but no one can deny that Susan Sarandon has lived fully, in her art, in her relationships, and in her lifelong fight for what she believes in. She once said what she desired most was not to be loved, but to be heard. And indeed, for more than half a century, the world has not only listened, it has remembered the woman who proved that freedom is not a destination, but a way of walking through life. Susan Sarandon, the undying flame of Hollywood. A woman who never waited for anyone to write her legend because she wrote it herself. And what about you? Which of Susan Sarandon's performances stays with you the most? What do you think makes her a timeless icon? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to join us as we continue uncovering the untold stories behind Hollywood's legends, where light, pain, and pride forever intertwine.